Good evening. My name is Lisa Ackerman. I'm the Executive Vice President here at World Monuments Fund, and it's a pleasure to welcome everybody this evening. And I was thinking a little bit about the fact we were having a lecture tonight on Frank Lloyd Wright and Taliesin and Taliesin West, and I was thinking, you know, we have this Reports from the Field series, and it's often about our work in places that sometimes are too remote for many of us to get to, and often we don't really talk about the actual architect. Many of the places are centuries, if not millennia old, and sometimes it's more the spirit of the place and the particular conservation challenges. And I was thinking tonight, this is really a rarity for us to think very much about an architect, not only one that many of us can name and have been to buildings, but really somebody who's had a profound effect on architecture, not only in America, but around the world. And I was thinking too about, for those of us who've studied architecture and preservation and planning, that Frank Lloyd Wright is really an extraordinary individual. And as time passes, I realize that he's ever more important to us, that he had a tremendous effect not just on architecture, but on planning and on education. And his ideas transformed the way we thought about commercial architecture and residential architecture, and ran the gamut from gas stations to a new city plan for Baghdad. And so his mind clearly was never quiet. And I think it's a rare opportunity for us to highlight the work of somebody who's really so extraordinary. And Taliesin and Taliesin West have both been on the World Monuments Watch in recent years to call attention to the fact that even places by extraordinary architects and much beloved can have challenges that sometimes are beyond the means of the people who are charged to take care of them. And in the case of Taliesin and Taliesin West, they really so represent the fact that Frank Lloyd Wright was thinking about architecture, education, and the way we interact with spaces and the landscape. And with that, I'd like to invite Frank Sanchez to come up and say a few words about Sean Malone, our speaker this evening.
Thank you, Lisa. That was lovely. She's such a thoughtful person. I never think of things like that. Well, I am Frank Sanchez, and I do run the United States program for the World Monuments Fund, and I'm happy to introduce Sean Malone, who is the president and CEO of the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation since January 2012. The Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation is based at Taliesin West, which is in Scottsdale, Arizona. That's near Phoenix, and Wright designed it originally in 1937. The foundation also oversees Taliesin, which is Wright's older home in Spring Green, Wisconsin, which dates from 1911. Wright lived in both places, and he continued to add to them both and modify them until his death in 1959. So both properties changed very much over the years. Besides Taliesin and Taliesin West, which are both National Historic Landmarks, Sean is also responsible for the oversight of the Frank Lloyd Wright School of Architecture, which you may have seen in the papers lately, whose 20 students study at Taliesin West in the winter and at Taliesin in Wisconsin in the summer. In his first 2 years at the foundation, Sean created a partnership which was much reported on with the Museum of Modern Art and Columbia University to jointly steward the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation archives, which were relocated from Taliesin West to Columbia's Avery Library of Architecture and Fine Arts. Both Taliesin and Taliesin West were listed in the 2010 World Monuments Watch. Taliesin was listed again on the current 2014 watch, specifically focusing on the Hillside Theater, which is Wright's oldest building at that property. Before joining the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation, Sean served for 10 years as president and CEO of the 10 Chimneys Foundation at Genesee Depot, Wisconsin. 10 Chimneys being the home of Alfred Lunt and Lynn Fontanne, which is now operated as a museum property and a center of education for theater and the arts. Sean's a graduate of the University of Southern California and received his MBA from the University of Wisconsin at Madison. He's going to talk to us today about Frank Lloyd Wright and about both Taliesins, following which he'll be happy to take questions. And at the conclusion of his presentation, we hope you'll join us for refreshments and conversation. It's my pleasure on behalf of the World Monuments Fund to welcome Sean Malone.
Thank you very much. Well, I have to say it's a real honor to be here with all of you today. I spend a lot of time talking with people about the value of preservation. As I am fundraising, I need to convince people of the value of preservation, and so it's exciting to be talking to people who so clearly understand that value so deeply already, and who are through your association with World Monuments Fund accomplishing so much extraordinary preservation, throughout the country and beyond. So thank you for that, first of all. But I'm going to be talking about the two Taliesins, but when we get to the Q&A, I hope that we have some chance either during the Q&A or afterwards for you to share your thoughts about why it is that preservation matters, since you're so dedicated to the cause, and that won't be part of my discussion tonight. I want to hear about you. So scholars and enthusiasts alike, I think you would know, agree that Taliesin and Taliesin West are two of the most important works of 20th century architecture. The layered complexity and depth and richness of meaning, I think, unmatched as places to understand Frank Lloyd Wright's work and his life, not just at those two sites, but around the country and around the world. They are, to be sure, extraordinary architectural accomplishments. They were also Wright's homes, his most personal creations ever. They were his studios, the place where so many of the greatest architectural icons of the 20th century were created, were formed, were, as Wright would say, shaken out of his sleeve. Do you know that story about Fallingwater? Where he thought he decided to think about Fallingwater for about 5 months. And then all of a sudden Kaufman said, "I'm coming up, I'll be there in the afternoon," and he just sort of shook it out of his sleeve and put it up. Perhaps apocryphal, perhaps real, but he sure told the story a lot. They were living laboratories, as Frank said. They were places of experimentation. They had ongoing changes. His new ideas about technology, about material, about connection of buildings to the landscape, he was always playing with them at both Taliesins, particularly Taliesin West, which had so much expansive land that was just flat and nobody was looking around. There were farms to tend in Spring Green. There were no farms to tend in the Sonoran Desert. And they were the places where Wright taught hundreds over the decades, hundreds of young men and women his principles of organic architecture, his views on how people should live together as a community. So they are very special and truly unique places. Mostly I want to talk. I promise you not a thing I say is ever going to be written up in words up there. But it's, but the two Taliesins are just too pretty for me not to have brought a few photos along. So let's start with Taliesin. And I've decided that since I am not an architectural scholar, the best way to explain Taliesin is to let Wright talk about it himself. So from his autobiography, when he was discussing the name Taliesin, Taliesin was the name of a Welsh poet, a druid bard or a singer of songs who sang to Wales the glories of fine art. Literally, the Welsh word means shining brow. This hill on which Taliesin now stands as a brow was one of my favorite places when I was a boy, for past flowers grew there in the March sun, while snow still streaked in the hillsides. He built Taliesin in 1911, as Frank said, or at least the first Taliesin. It was there were 2 fires and it was rebuilt twice. In 1937, he picked the site for Taliesin West, and in talking about Taliesin West in his autobiography, said, Taliesin West in the mountains above Phoenix is a look over the rim of the world. As a name for our far western desert camp, we arrived at it after so many more romantic names were set up and knocked down. The circumstances were so picturesque that names ran wild. So we settled sensibly to the one we already had, simply adding West. So this is a picture of tours happening at Taliesin West. This is students presenting plans in the studio at Taliesin in Wisconsin. This is the studio at Taliesin West, and they happen to be looking at some preservation issues with the ceiling. Taliesin West was really created as a desert camp, and so the experience was all canvas roofs, canvas overhangs. For the first couple of decades, no glass anywhere, just canvas that you would bring down when it got to be monsoon season. And so, as you might imagine, that presents a preservation challenge or two. This is the Blue Loggia from Taliesin in Wisconsin. Wright's office at Taliesin West. That's actually the Blue Loggia. The other one was Wright's bedroom. Sorry. And this is the breezeway at Taliesin West, which is looking out to the prow, which then looks out over the city. So just a minute about what the foundation is, because there are plenty of people who know Frank Lloyd Wright and lots of people who say, Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation, what's the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation? So I mean, the first thing to know is that we are not a funding institution in any way. The foundation, the name foundation, was what Frank Lloyd Wright gave it when he created it. And it was in a lot of ways just a repository for him to not own anything. I won't suggest his motives for not owning anything. I will simply put out that that's what it was when he created foundation, and that was the word du jour about 75 years ago. But now, you know, the mission of the foundation is there's three basic components: to preserve and steward Taliesin, Taliesin West, and the Taliesin collections. Move that a little bit. I think we're getting a little bit of feedback. To shape architecture and design at the highest level, and to endeavor to transform people's lives through the living experience of Frank Lloyd Wright's body of work, of his architecture and his design. And so, you know, said more simply, it's preservation, education, and public engagement and access. And before I get to preservation, I'll talk for just a second about the other ones. In terms of education, the current Frank Lloyd Wright School of Architecture is the current evolution of the Taliesin Fellowship, which Wright created in 1932 as his band of apprentices who would ultimately go on to work with him on creating all of the work that he created from 1932 on, which is an awful lot. It's a small, highly exclusive program. We have about 20 students and can barely fit more than that. Providing really an unparalleled immersion educational experience with students living and learning at both Taliesins, training to be architects, learning by doing, drafting and creating and problem solving in the very studios where Wright created all of his work, building community, building shelters in the desert that they'll live in, connecting to the past and looking toward the future. And Frank alluded, we are just now launching an endeavor to form a partnership with another educational institution, one that will both nurture and grow that truly unique in the world immersion educational experience, and will also deepen our academic capabilities and our impact on the field of architecture. And we're very excited about what that new endeavor is going to accomplish in the years to come, and the next evolution of the Taliesin Fellowship, which has evolved a number of times in its 82-year history. It's been an accredited school for the last 20 or so. We also have extensive programs for students from kindergarten through high school, including architecture camps, distant learning programs, field trips, and collaborations with institutions across the country. Public access and engagement is everything you would expect from institutions. An institution like this, we have tours of both Taliesins. About 100,000 people a year visit Taliesin West, about 30 or 40,000 a year visit Taliesin in Wisconsin. Cultural programs, lectures, symposia, immersive artist residencies. We do a significant amount of service to other public rights sites, both in terms of promotion and awareness and that sort of thing. But also we just convened a summit, a first ever summit of all the directors of all the rights sites from around the country to try to say, what are our shared challenges, what are our shared values, and what can we do moving forward? You might have sometime in your life seen a Frank Lloyd Wright product or two, and we help shape those so that people can have a little bit of rights design in their daily lives, which we think has value, not just to help fund preservation, but also to people in their lives. And as Frank mentioned, we're very proud of our collaboration with the Museum of Modern Art and Columbia University on the joint stewardship of the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation archives, which includes international public exhibition, or soon to be international public exhibition, scholarly and public access, planned publications, conservation, and much more. And then finally, there's preservation. The preservation is, without question, the heart of everything that we do. We are deeply committed to thoughtful and thorough preservation and stewardship of Taliesin West, and of our significant collections, which include art, artifacts, furnishings, prototypes, personal effects and ephemera, and much more. You know, preservation to us is a public trust. It is our highest and deepest obligation, and intrinsically valuable in a way that I don't need to explain to anybody in this room. It's also the inspiration for every other program that we do. And so everything, whether it's the preservation program to begin with or what it inspires, everything comes back to that preservation. We are about 2/3 of the way through a planning project that is going to, for the first time in the organization's history, help us define at both Taliesins exactly what needs to be restored, to what level, why, and why has been quite an interesting question. What is it that's significant and how are we restoring it? And how much is it going to cost? And that's something that the organizations have never really had, and we're very proud to be as close to that as we are right now. A wonderful architect named Gunny Harbo, who's a preservation architect, has been leading that endeavor. And then even in the interim, we're very proud of an increase in our annual investment in preservation and care. I mean, Frank has talked about going back to 2010, and there have been a lot of people for a long time who've, to be frank, expressed worry about what's happening at the Taliesins, and are they going to be okay, and are these things going to be cared for? And so 5 years ago, which goes back to right before we were both on the watch list, we spent about $1 million, or the organization, I wasn't there 5 years ago, but spent about $1 million on Taliesin and Taliesin West combined for all preservation, care, maintenance, and other capital projects. This year, we'll spend just under $3 million on those same pieces. And it's not that the need's gone up. The need was there back then, but it was a time that it was finally time for us to invest, start reaching out and start taking a few leaps of faith and doing the work and knowing that eventually people would be a part of it. So a lot's being accomplished, and even more is needed. And let's take a little bit of a look at some of the things that are going on. This is there's a wonderful sculpture that they were taking out of there, and you can see it right there, called The Flower in the Crannied Wall, which dates back to the earliest days of Taliesin, was in severe disrepair. This was a collections item, and we've removed it, fully restored it, and reinstalled it into Wright's studio right inside where it was before, because the elements, it was created perhaps to be ephemera. It wasn't created to stand up against the elements. And you might imagine the winters in spring green are polar vortexy, I think is the technical term. Frank talked about Hillside Theater. It is one of my absolute favorite spaces at Taliesin. It's actually the second oldest building on the grounds, but very, very old. And it's, we've just completed, as a first piece of that project, a major restoration of the interiors at Hillside. These chairs and some work to to the beautiful decorative curtain that's there. But there's significant more work to do at Hillside, including structural work and other issues that we'll be taking on. This is right outside the main house of Taliesin. We are nearly done with with major structural repairs to the area, and so for years, for the last couple of years, all you saw when you looked at Taliesin, the iconic view that we looked at the beginning, was big blue tarps. And I'm very pleased that now Taliesin is not big blue tarps. There's a wonderful building that is the oldest building on the Taliesin grounds that was actually built by Wright before he ever decided to build Taliesin there. So Frank was right. It was Hillside was the beginning of Taliesin as his place. But this was a house that he built for his sister, Jane Porter, and you can see some of the work that has been done to restore it. So it dates back to before 1911, before the original date of Taliesin. And that's now a space, and so this is now a house that allows us to provide workspace and residential space for visiting scholars and guest artists and artists in residence. Before we leave Taliesin, I have to show just a few more of the beauty shots. That's the main house, the crown and the stone wall. So this is behind that main house view that people often see when they're looking at Taliesin. This is inside Wright's studio, at personal office and studio, not the Hillside studio where he worked with his apprentices. Midway barn, because this was a working farm, or at the very least a gentleman's working farm. And the beautiful waterfall that's right there at Taliesin. But there is still much work to be done at Taliesin, even beyond Hillside Theater. When this is the side of the Midway barn when you don't have it far away with red color correction. This is at the Taliesin main house and a crumbling wall. Those are the support beams that are holding up a major wing at Taliesin for now. Those are the crumbling steps to the Taliesin garden. And that is the roof of the Hillside Theater. And the reason that all of those chairs and other things that we just restored have to get taken out in the winter, because otherwise we would have restored it for no reason. So moving a couple thousand miles to the west, Taliesin West was established as a desert camp, and still to the extent that it possibly can, holds on to that form, that sense of being a desert oasis, being on top of or on the brow of the world. The ongoing preservation of Taliesin West has included major wood replacement. You can see the wood that was used everywhere. It was a lot of redwood, which in the desert was beautiful and cheap at the time, but not necessarily the best material to last for decades and decades. And also major painting upgrades, structural systems, repairs to other pieces of what's going on there. One of the things that we're very excited about is that little piece of restoration. So this is something that we've just added at Taliesin West. When you were standing at the historic core, we like to take people on the prow and point at this and show them that they can't see it. Because they could see it driving in, but we positioned it behind cacti and in the desert so that you can't see it at all. But we're in the beginning stages of a major endeavor to turn all of Taliesin West into a net zero energy site, to create every bit of electricity that we need to use. In part because it's tied very much to Wright's core values. I mean, particularly at Taliesin West, the idea of strategic use of limited resources was really critical to him and was critical to him in all of his endeavors. He was deeply excited by technology always testing new technologies and sometimes testing them before they were ready. When you think about Wright's progression, he was born at the tail end of the Civil War and died at the launch of the space age. And so as much as we think about what kind of technological innovations we go through in our lives, with our iPhone 6s that won't fit in our hands, it's really nothing compared to Wright's progression. And we're also very excited about the idea of this as a beacon of Taliesin West, of people coming and looking at this endeavor. I mean, and this was all donated. We didn't spend preservation money on this. A solar company donated this and donated a number of other things that we've been doing. But we're already seeing people come and sort of so excited about that happening, and it's making them rethink what they can do in terms of sustainability and conservation. That, if this internationally known National Historic Landmark can do it, well, maybe there are things that I can do. This is the studio back when it was open air. So you can see it's air out there. There's no glass. It's all open. This is a beautiful shot from the Kiva. This is right outside the Wright's bedrooms and the garden room. And again, if you look at that glass right over here, I don't know if they'll still hear me, but if you look at this, that's the garden room, which is beautiful. But again, when Wright first started it, there was no glass there. It was just this open tented area. More again of the sense of this desert thing. This is the inside of the garden room. But again, there's extraordinary work that needs to be done. This is the drafting studio, and you can see both the ceiling and the floor have real needs. This is the water tower with very weathered wood. This is one of the cottages right there in the apprentice court, right in the middle of things. So Wright was often asked throughout his career, what was your greatest building? What was your greatest accomplishment? They started asking this very early on, but for the last 5 years of his life, he was asked in almost every single interview, paper, print, or TV. And he always answered, he always gave the exact same answer. When they said, what is your greatest accomplishment? What was your greatest work? He always said, the next one. Mm-hmm. And the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation is very proud of the preservation that we've accomplished, and particularly over the last couple of years as we've really revved it up. But we too know that our greatest work is what lies ahead. And we know that we'll need a wide community of individuals and organizations and friends like World Monument Fund to be a part of rallying support and to invest in saving the two Taliesins for future generations. We I think know that the not inconsiderable challenge ahead of us is far, far outweighed by the importance that we collectively succeed. It's an exciting time. It's always important to rise to challenges when you've got things that are truly irreplaceable, places that are deeply inspirational and important to who we are as individuals and as a people. And it's an exciting thing to start making new friends and working on how we make sure that multiple generations to come have the same opportunity for inspiration. I am happy to answer any questions and even happier to hear your ideas and suggestions and thoughts on preservation, both now and afterwards when we have wine. Do we have wine? I don't want to...
Yes,
okay. That would have made me a real jerk. Yes, sir.
Wright's buildings generally are not known for the soundness of their structure.
Yeah.
And many of them have had to have very substantial modifications in order to stand up.
Right.
I visited Taliesin, and clearly it wasn't intended to last for the ages. But yet, what kind of policies are you using in your restoration, reflecting the fact that putting it back exactly the way it was originally built it's going to crumble again.
Right.
So how do you accommodate that?
That's a great question. Now, they asked me to repeat the questions for the video, so we'll also get to see whether I listen well enough to understand the question. It's sort of a test. My wife would be very happy that I was having this test. So the question was that, Wright's buildings sometimes have a reputation for not having a structural stability that's going to make it last for centuries on end. If that's fair. And a very interesting question about how you approach the preservation philosophy when that's the case. That if you were to exactly emulate what was done the first time, you would simply be resetting a ticking clock that would then deteriorate again. Is that a fair?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And so that's one of the big things, it's one of the number of big things that we've been working on in this preservation master plan that we've been working on, and in particular the preservation philosophy. And so, I think that when you have things that are conflicting about original materials, exact original presentation versus experience of place and sustainability, experience of place and sustainability is what wins out. And so, I believe that there are ways to do all of these things, and we've pursued them in the past, and I know we'll be pursuing them very diligently moving forward. So that if you're dealing with, a lot of those structural issues we were looking at, those are never seen by people who are experiencing it, whether we're talking about artists in residence or students or 150,000 tour visitors a year. There's a lot that you can do on the structural side that you repair it, and they don't see it, and we make sure that the interiors and the exteriors and the things you're seeing are powerful. That's sort of the easy part. If the foundation is wrong, nobody's going to see the foundation. The trickier thing gets to something like the canvas roofs over at Taliesin West, and that's something we've been talking a lot about. And, Wright tried at least four, maybe 5 different ways of configuring these canvas roofs. And so we can't emulate exactly what he did. He did 5 different things. And so what we can do, though, is say, so what was he doing? He was creating this sense of, and the roof can't stay, right? So we can't just leave it because this one's failing too. So we don't have an option of do nothing. We don't have an option of exact replication of what he did in 1938. But we do have this sense of what was the place? How did they use these roofs? What was the feeling when you were inside? What was the aesthetic and feeling when you were looking at it? And there are new fabrics that aren't technically canvas, but new fabrics that create this canvas fabric roof. And that we can still embrace the idea of, and this is something we're exploring, of something that is more or less temporary. They had big wooden squares, and they put on new canvas every 2 years. And I don't know that that's exactly what we're going to do, but we're very open to that as the model. Maybe we pick a kind of fabric, a kind of faux canvas that looks exactly like canvas and has the right feel in terms of the light, and we put it up, and part of the experience of being in residence there or visiting there is that a couple times a year, or once every couple of years, it gets taken off, it gets recanvassed, it gets put on, so that we're not putting ourselves in the place that, frankly, some might have looked at of saying, well, we need the one thing that's going to last 500 years, and so we're going to spend X million on this perfect, gonna stand forever replica that could look like a canvas roof. Instead, we can say, this was meant to feel temporary and feel like canvas, and so let's do that, and let's spend a fraction of that much money spread out over the next 20 years, recreating that experience. I mean, that's one example, and your question's a complex one, and we'll have a different approach to each one, but that's sort of a general idea. Yes, sir, right there, and then to the right.
Frank Lloyd Wright was known as an early adopter of technology, and probably way ahead of his time in terms of structure. So I would assume that had he had a material that was better than canvas, he would have used it.
Yes, I think you're right. What he said was that Frank Lloyd Wright was an early adopter of technology, always ahead of his time, which is very true, and not unrelated to the first question, because sometimes that worked brilliantly and sometimes it didn't. But he did always embrace new things. And so that's why we are so focused on, the goal is authenticity, right? And authenticity can't always be exact emulation of what happened to be there in 1938, but it also can't be complete conjecture on our part. We do have to look at what is the feel, what is the look, what is the nature of the light. There's a lot for us to work on it, but certainly, and our preservation philosophy has to be driven by what serves the public, not by, do we think the ghost of Frank Lloyd Wright would be happy? I happen to think that those things aren't mutually exclusive, though, and that we can do something that is experimenting with materials, but making sure the place feels like, looks like, is experienced in a way that it was when it was hailed as one of the great architectural creations of the century. Yes, sir.
I'm sure that many of us have read with distress the unusually high attrition rate of his structures.
Mm-hmm.
Has your foundation compiled some statistics on what percentage remain and how many significant structures there are?
The question was about the number of right sites that have been lost, and what kind of statistics or lists we have that sort of share what's going on. We're going to be just in the next couple of months, we're going to be launching a new website that is very much a place for people to explore and learn and engage with Wright. It isn't intended to answer that question, but it will answer that question, because one of the things you can do is look at all of the Wright sites that exist, and over time we hope to put, both the ones that are still there and the ones that were, have been lost. We are not an institution that is a national preservation advocacy group. We work very closely with another Frank Lloyd Wright organization that does a wonderful job that's called the Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservancy. And they, have taken up the mantle and do a wonderful job of making people aware of, the showroom here in Manhattan that was lost, or or the David Wright house in Phoenix that was saved. And obviously David Wright house was Frank Lloyd Wright's son and right there in Phoenix, and we were very involved in that. But they are, they really look at what are the overarching conservation issues and how can we do advocacy, and they do a lot of work with homeowners, because there's 50 or 60 Wright buildings that are publicly owned or open to the public or run by nonprofits, but there are 400 some, maybe in the low 400s of Frank Lloyd Wright buildings out of high 400s that were ever made. So that's sort of the broad answer to your question. I don't want to give exact answers because I don't want to give them wrong. So a number have been lost, but they are, most of those homes are owned by individuals. And so the Conservancy does a wonderful job of bringing people together and saying, okay, so we're going to talk about stone. We're going to talk about concrete. We're going to talk about this kind of floor, and helping them have a community to work with each other. And of course, we're, an active part of that community and work with them to help in any ways that we can. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question about interior conservation
Mm-hmm.
and non-structural, actually. And the question is about simple comfort. And
Mm-hmm.
how do you deal with things like air conditioning
Yeah.
over the years